where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, and where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. Frederick Douglass.
In my video where I talked about old money paradoxically siding with the left, a big question I got in the comments was, well, where do the other classes align with? If the old money paradoxically benefits from left-wing policies, is it true that other classes have unexpected allies in partisan politics? Well, in this video, I'm going to go over the entire American class hierarchy, and depending on what station in life each individual fits in, which of the major two political parties in America has an economic policy that works in their best interest. And for this video, I'm really going to be focusing on economic policy. There could be social issues that could cause somebody to align outside of their class's financial interests. Also, on top of that, there can be very niche specific government projects that could benefit somebody economically that may not cross on these lines either. And immigration, for the sake of argument for this video, is considered an economic issue. On top of that, this doesn't necessarily apply to politics outside of the United States because they have different class structures and they have other issues that dominate. So with that out of the way, let's get started with the bulk of the analysis. Well, at the top of the pyramid, you have the establishment elite. And historically, the establishment elite was split 50-50 between the right and the left. However, in recent elections, it has shifted more to aligning with the left for reasons why I mentioned in the previous video I've discussed about old money political allegiances. But that does not mean 100% of them. There still are plenty of old money families, even in the Northeast and California, who still align with the right. However, from a class alignment interests, the current platform of the political left in the country tends to cater to old money's interest more than the right. The counter elite, on the other hand, are definitely more aligned with the right side of the aisle. The counter elite has mostly built its wealth through entrepreneurship, through not participating in the major corporations or the government or other institutions that are controlled by the establishment elite. And the establishment elite want to keep their control and influence, so they keep out the counter elite or other new money who does want to participate in the establishment's club and the way they do things. Elon Musk, for example, is a good example of a counter elite entrepreneur. He bought X and changed it in a way more angled towards free speech and more sympathetic to right-wing causes. And his unwillingness to conform to a lot of the moral niceties that the establishment elite takes for granted, even if he was previously somebody with more progressive politics, kind of by default put him in the counter-elite bucket. And Elon Musk, I mentioned him specifically because his story is similar to a lot of other people in the counter-elite who've kind of been forced there because they wouldn't kiss the metaphorical ring to fit in. And the right in America now is kind of the anti-establishment, rebellious type of people have flocked to it, or people have built their own means outside of the system and don't feel like they should have to just give it all up to preserve the goals of the establishment elite. And in general, with these two pyramids, the left side, which is the establishment track, and the right side, which is the anti-establishment track for building wealth and success. And I went into more detail of this on my video on the American social class hierarchy, tend to be where the divide is in modern politics. The left side, you can really symbolize people whose educational attainment tends to be greater than earnings power, and the people on the right tend to be people whose earning power is greater than their educational attainment. It's also going to apply to prestige on resume. So people who've worked at like the most prestigious Fortune 500 companies or the most prestigious nonprofits or NGOs, or have experience working in Washington in high-level government positions, tend to be on the left side of this class hierarchy. So people who built their own paths with spending minimal time in the institutional metrics of society, or didn't spend any time in that society and just always worked either at small businesses or started their own business, tend to be the pipeline to the counter elite. And this dynamic of whether somebody's status should be based on credentials, whether it's education or the level of prestige of your employment, tend to be more aligned with the left, which basically kind of is that everybody has a certain place and it should be determined based on how well you did at university or check certain boxes that are socially acceptable or trendy. Whereas the other side is like, I don't want to follow those rules. I want to build my own way. I may make more money, but I'm not respected because I didn't go through the quote unquote respectable path. And so those are probably the two forces that are driving the leadership on the left and the right. And you can see this just how each group behaves. The left is more by the book, doing things through the proper institutions, and whereas the right is the bull in the china shop right now and wants to break all the rules. And that's kind of how, and let things be free and have, again, some of my commenters say, the more libertarian free-for-all in terms of how merit should be distributed and how and how wealth should be gained in our society. The middle class and the clerical class, it kind of depends on what track they're going on here. Those who are on the track to try to move up the establishment tend to benefit more from the left, whereas the middle class who wants to try to pursue a path on their own benefits from being on the right. However, in general, I would say the middle class benefits more from right-wing economic policy. Their tax burdens go down because of it. Lower immigration rates means that they have less competition for jobs, and they're far enough away from the social safety net that they're not going to be using it much in their lifetime. And if they do, it might be for more smaller things such as in-state college education and less tied to the welfare industrial complex in one way or another. And so therefore, the middle class tends to benefit from more right-wing economics in terms of lower taxation, more competition. If any of these people want to pursue an entrepreneurial path, the right is more facilitative towards that. However, at the same time, they're not going to ever make enough money that the benefits of progressive taxation are going to start to work in their favor, but they're not going to really be poor enough to get the benefits from social protections. In Europe, this would be a different calculation. In Europe, the middle class would be more aligned with the left because a lot of the social benefits and protections there trickle up and are given a lot more to conventionally middle class people, whereas in America, most middle class people won't really get any sort of benefit from the state in their lifetime apart from maybe in-state tuition while they're in college. The working and the precariat class, their economic interests are aligned with the left, especially in the short term. A lot of the things here in terms of economic policy for really even the middle class too recently, as the economy is getting more precariat, but more so for the precariat class, because the working class and the precariat class are people who are basically can't really save money, and they're one or two missed paychecks away from being on the street. And that level of insecurity and the security of a bigger safety net really means something to these people because they're more likely to have to tap into it. And they probably have friends or family who've had to tap into it. And the security, let's just say like if they knew that their health care is guaranteed and they had rent controls or other protections, that would lower their stress and they would feel a lot more secure. Yet the real, especially with how progressive tax brackets are relatively in America, their income is likely not going to get high enough that they get hit hard by the high tax brackets and really face the real downside of a progressive taxation system to finance these. So this class is probably the strongest beneficiary of the left. If at the same time, though, a lot of it is shorter term. And because even though, say, for example, these left-wing policies in the short term provide an extra sense of security and oftentimes increase real wealth in the short term through economic stimulus, in the long run, the losses from inflation tend to outweigh the gains from the increased safety net. Or even worse, if inflation continues high enough because of the deficit spending need to finance this thing, it could move these working precariat class people down into the underclass, and then they're stuck. So it's really kind of a dangerous bargain to support left-wing populism, because for the lower three classes in this chart, it benefits them in the short term because they get relief that they might need now, if they're, especially the precariat, if they're desperate and they need help or need a sense of security to feel comfortable navigating in the world, or just have their family get by for another year or two. However, in the long run, those gains, they're being financed from inflation or higher taxes, particularly higher taxes that directly affect the lower classes, because there's just simply not enough money to taxed from the elites to cover all of these things. They end up paying for it in the long run. Immigration is also another economic policy that appears to be beneficial for most of the social classes in the economy in the short term, but in the long term tends to hurt most social classes except for the establishment elite and the business owning classes. I can get into more on the economics of immigration in developed nations in a separate video, but in general, it boosts the economy in the short term due to increased demand from new consumers coming in, and more demand, whether it's for more apartments need to be rented, more food need to be bought at the grocery stores, more consumer goods to be bought, more gas spent at the gas stations, etc. And on top of that, it can help keep wages from rising too quickly and causing potential inflation problems, or provide enough services for retirees as the natural population cliff pyramid tends to invert. However, in the long run, immigration is that it keeps demand above a sustainable level for the economy, particularly with a lot of regulations against housing construction and urban development. So the result is you have a higher cost of living increases than you would otherwise, because you have more people competing for the same amount of housing and other essential services. And also, on the other hand, you have more people competing for the same amount of jobs. And so the result is wages tend to drop across the entire system, unless if you are a business owner employing these immigrants. And so immigration, on the short term, it keeps the economy afloat and delays a recession potentially. And also just by increasing demand for more perishable goods and services. But in the long run, it increases the price level while suppressing wages. So it has a similar effect to other economic populist policies, whereas the same class, except the benefits of immigration tend to skew up the class ladder. The bottom class, who's dependent on the state, is not really affected by immigration unless if the social safety net is just destroyed because it can't handle the inflows of new people. If you have a smart enough immigration policy that limits the dependence on the state from coming into the country, that's not an issue. The people who are hurt most from immigration are from a purely economic, I'm not getting into the cultural issues here, are the working class and the middle class and the professional classes. And then the main beneficiaries are the elites and the business owners, who now have a bunch of new customers and or cheaper sources of labor. So that's another, so it's not exactly the same in terms of the winners and losers, but it's close enough that it has the same intertemporal struggle with a lot of economic populist policies and a lot of left-wing policies, because open immigration is a left-wing policy in the Western world, tend to be stimulative in the short term, but detrimental in the long term for the same people. So it's really an intertemporal issue. In the short term, the middle and working classes benefit from left-wing policies, and in the long term, they get hurt once the costs are fully trickled into the system. And it's actually the opposite for the elites. In the short term, the elites get hurt by left-wing policy because they have to pay higher taxes, or they're going to face more business regulation. But in the long run, they benefit because those same high taxes and increased business regulation are barriers to entry for competition of new money or new businesses or other disruptors that could knock them off their perch. So it's the intertemporal relationship between progressive policies is the reverse. And then the bottom is the underclass, those just dependent on the state or outside the formal economy. They benefit also from left-wing policies on the net both in the short term and the long term. There really isn't an intertemporal because, yeah, sure, they'll suffer from inflation, but since their wages are low anyway, wages generally tend to catch up better with inflation than more middle class or higher wage jobs, like between the level of the elite / successful business owner level and the if you're below that, like you're in the middle class or the working class, you are the wages who suffer the most versus inflation in inflationary environments. Whereas the underclass, they tend to hold up a little bit better. And also a lot of their benefits, such as food stamps or subsidized housing or other things, are payment in kind. And payment in kind moves up with inflation. So they're not as hurt by inflation as the higher classes are. So the underclass is actually the one who always benefits from left-wing policy. And so their economic interests align with the left. So overall, what does this mean for the balance of politics? Well, it leads to suboptimal decisions in terms of economic policy. Because if you look at it in the short term, the bottom three classes, the underclass, the working class, the middle class, and I'd add the institutional professional classes, in the short term I'm saying 3 years or less time frame, tend to benefit from economic left-wing and populist policies. And those groups combined exceed 70% of the population in the United States of America, and probably similar ratios, if not higher, in other parts of the world. And so as a result, their short-term economic interests favor progressive policies, but their long-term economic interests of the middle class, the working class, and the institutional class, and also the independent professional classes as well, all get hurt due to the cost of this through either longer-term higher taxation or inflation outweigh, in the long run, the short-term gains from these policies. So let's just say the 70% of the population benefits from these policies in the short term, but I'd say it's about 70% who are hurt from these in the long run, except to replace the underclass with the Ivy League class, successful business owners, the independent professional class, and the counter elite as the other losers. But overall, it's about the same percentage of the population who's going to lose from these policies in the long run. And when it comes to fiscal conservative policies, it's the reverse. In the short term, the beneficiaries of fiscal conservative policies in the short term tend to be the losers of fiscal conservative policies in the long term. And vice versa. So that's it's an intertemporal problem, I think, with a lot of this. And if you're confused, or if you'd like to talk about further, or you disagree, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. And please like, subscribe, and share. The momentum on this Old Money series has really helped explode this channel. I look forward to delivering you more of this type of content if the reception continues to be as good as it has been. Thank you for watching.